My name is Rachel Doyle, and I'm 32 years old. Christmas Eve was supposed to be the one night of the year when everything felt safe. When the house smelled like pine and cinnamon, when the lights on the tree made everything look warmer than it actually was. I had been living back at my parents' house for 7 months. Not because I wanted to, but because a bad breakup had left me starting over from scratch. I was working 2 part-time jobs, saving every dollar I could, and trying to rebuild quietly. I wasn't a burden. I paid for my own groceries, did my own laundry, stayed out of everyone's way. I thought I was doing everything right. That night, my mother called me downstairs around 9 o'clock. My father was already sitting at the kitchen table with his arms crossed, and the second I saw his face, I knew something had shifted. My younger sister Vanessa was leaning against the counter with the small, satisfied smirk she'd been wearing for weeks, like she knew something I didn't. I sat down across from my father and asked what was going on. He slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. It was a handwritten list of every expense they claimed I had cost them over the past 7 months. Groceries, utilities, water, internet. They had assigned dollar amounts to each one, and at the bottom, my father had written a total. It was more than $4,000. I told him I had been paying for my own food. I reminded him that I had fixed the leaking pipe under the sink myself, that I had repainted the back fence without being asked, that I had driven my mother to her doctor appointment 6 times when her car was in the shop. None of it mattered. My father told me that I had always been a financial drain, that I had never been able to take care of myself, and that they were done enabling me. My mother didn't say a word. She just stood there looking at the floor. Vanessa poured herself a glass of water like this was completely normal dinner conversation. I asked them what they were saying. My father stood up, walked to the front closet, pulled out a single bag, already packed, and set it on the floor next to the table. Inside were a few clothes, my phone charger, and a toothbrush. That was it. Everything else I owned was upstairs in my room. When I tried to go up and get my things, my father blocked the staircase. He told me I could collect the rest of my belongings after the holiday. Tonight, I needed to leave. It was 22 degrees outside. It was Christmas Eve. I looked at my mother one more time, and she finally said something. She said, "You can't do anything on your own, Rachel. You never could. You're desperate." She said it quietly, like she'd been holding it for years and was finally relieved to let it go. I picked up the bag. I walked out. The door closed behind me and I heard the lock turn. I sat in my car for almost an hour. I didn't know where to go. I had friends, but asking someone to take you in on Christmas Eve with no warning felt like too much to put on anyone. I kept thinking about what my mother said, desperate, and the more I heard it in my head, the more something else started to rise up underneath the hurt. Anger. Real, quiet, steady anger. At some point, I remembered the card. My grandfather, Owen Doyle, had passed away 3 years earlier, and in his will he had left me a bank card with a handwritten note that said, "For when you really need it, Rach. Don't open it early." I had kept that card in my wallet the entire time, tucked behind my license, untouched. I had always assumed it was something small, maybe a few $100s he had set aside. Something symbolic. A way of reaching across from wherever he had gone to remind me he loved me. I had never used it because it felt sacred and because I kept telling myself I didn't need it yet. Sitting in that freezing car on Christmas Eve, locked out of the only home I had with $22 in my checking account, I decided that yet had arrived. The nearest branch wasn't open until the morning, so I drove to a 24-hour diner, ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu, and sat at a corner booth until sunrise. When the bank finally opened at 9, I walked in still wearing yesterday's clothes, my eyes raw from no sleep. A manager named Arthur greeted me at the door. I handed him the card and explained that I had never used it and wasn't sure what was tied to it. He took it to his computer. A full 2 minutes passed. When he turned back around, his face had gone completely pale. He looked at me like I was someone he hadn't expected to walk through that door. He pulled out a chair from the nearest desk and said, very quietly, "Ma'am, please sit down. You need to see this." My hands were shaking before I even looked at the screen. I sat down in that chair like my legs had made the decision before my brain did. Arthur turned the monitor slowly toward me, And I remember thinking, in that strange slow-motion way your mind works when something enormous is happening, that the carpet in that bank was an ugly shade of beige, and the Christmas music playing overhead was too cheerful for what was unfolding in front of my eyes. The screen showed an account balance. I read the number once. Then I read it again. Then I looked up at Arthur, who was watching me with the careful expression of someone who has delivered unexpected news before and knows to wait. The account my grandfather Owen had linked to that card held $473,000. I asked Arthur if there was a mistake. He shook his head slowly and told me that the account had been opened in my name 17 years ago, when I was 15, with an initial deposit made by my grandfather. Over the years, it had grown through a combination of interest and several additional deposits, the last one made just 6 weeks before Owen passed away. He had structured it specifically so that I was the sole owner and beneficiary. No one else had access. No one else even had the right to know it existed. Arthur told me quietly that the account had a flag on it, a notation left by the original branch manager at the time of opening. The flag said that one person had come in asking about the account approximately 2 years after my grandfather's death. That person had been turned away because they were not the account holder. The name on the inquiry record was my father's. I felt the room tilt slightly. My father had known. He had known, or at least suspected, that my grandfather left me something significant. He had gone to the bank to find out how much and had been denied. And then, 7 months ago, when I showed up at their door asking for temporary shelter, he had let me in, not out of love, not out of obligation, but because he was waiting, watching, maybe hoping I would eventually hand something over, or sign something, or be worn down enough to feel like I owed them. And when that didn't happen, when I stayed quiet and kept to myself and never mentioned Owen or the card or anything at all, he had decided to push me out before I figured any of it out on my own. Christmas morning. 22 degrees. A pre-packed bag with 3 shirts and a toothbrush. You can't do anything on your own, desperate. It had all been calculated. I sat in that bank for 2 hours. Arthur connected me with a financial advisor on staff who walked me through everything. The account structure, my options, the process for moving the funds, setting up proper management. I opened a new personal account in my name only, transferred everything, and by noon on Christmas Day, I was no longer the woman who had been locked out of her parents' house with $22 and a cup of diner coffee. I called a friend, Simone, who had been texting me since the night before asking if I was okay. I told her what happened, all of it. She cried before I did. Within the week, I had signed a lease on a small apartment across town. I paid 6 months up front without blinking. I bought myself a bed, a couch, dishes, and a coffee maker, and I stood in the middle of that empty apartment on moving day and felt something I had not felt in a very long time, like the floor beneath me was solid and it was mine and nobody could pull it away. I did not contact my parents. I didn't send a message, didn't drive past the house, didn't ask Simone to pass anything along. There was nothing to say that the silence didn't say better. My father had gone to that bank and been turned away, and he had carried that frustration for 2 years and eventually turned it into a Christmas eviction while my mother stood in the kitchen looking at the floor. Vanessa had leaned against the counter and smirked. I thought about all 3 of them often in those first few weeks, not with hatred, but with a kind of clear-eyed recognition. I finally saw them accurately. That's a painful thing and a freeing thing at the same time. My grandfather Owen used to say that the people who underestimate you are doing you a favor, because they always show you exactly who they are while they're doing it. He was a quiet man who worked his whole life, asked for nothing, and apparently spent 17 years making sure that if I ever ended up alone in the cold with nothing, I wouldn't stay that way for long. He was right about everything. I just needed one Christmas morning to find out. If this story hit something real in you, if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you, you're not alone, and this channel exists for exactly that. Subscribe to Core Revenge Tales and stay with us. There are more stories coming, and every single one of them is for people who know what it feels like to finally sit down and see the screen.